Lady Zareth stood perfectly still in the grand hall of House Valthara as her father spoke. Lord Commander Valthara was a tall figure in his dark robes, his silver eyes cold as winter stars. The neural implants behind her ears hummed softly, keeping her thoughts aligned with proper behavior. She felt the familiar warmth of obedience flowing through her mind like sweet honey. "You will travel to the outer rim," her father said, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. "The humans have broken their containment again. These creatures never learn their place." Zareth nodded without hesitation. The movement was smooth, and automatic, programmed into her since birth. "I understand, Father. I will enforce the law." The Kethmori Empire stretched across 3 arms of the galaxy, and her people ruled it all. They were the perfect beings, genetically crafted for leadership and wisdom. Lesser species served them gladly because it was the natural order. The hierarchy was sacred, written into the very fabric of space itself. Her transport ship waited. In the palace docking bay, the crew of Threk's servants bowed deeply as she approached. Their gray skin and hunched backs marked them as a worker caste, bred for labor and service. They moved with quick, nervous energy, afraid to displease their betters. "Prepare for jump to the Terran sector," Zarathi commanded. Her voice carried the authority of noble blood. The servants scrambled to obey. Space folded around them as they entered hyperspace. Zareth sat in her meditation chamber, reviewing the mission files. The humans had established a colony beyond their permitted boundaries. This was not the first time. The species seemed unable to accept limits, always pushing forward like water, seeking cracks in stone. The files showed images of the human settlement. Strange buildings made of metal and glass dotted a green world. Ships of crude design sat in orbital platforms. Everything looked chaotic and unplanned, so different from the perfect symmetry of Kethmori architecture. 3 days later, they arrived at the human colony world. The planet was called New Haven, according to the records. Zareth studied it through the viewscreen as her ship approached. Blue oceans and white clouds swirled beneath them. It reminded her of paintings she had seen in the palace galleries, though she could not remember why that thought felt important. A human ship moved to intercept them. It was smaller than her vessel, but moved with surprising grace. The communication system crackled to life. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the colony ship New Horizon. Please state your business in our space." Zareth felt a strange flutter in her chest at the casual tone. No one had ever spoken to her without proper titles and formalities. Her implants corrected the feeling quickly, replacing it with appropriate displeasure at the human's rudeness. "I am Lady Zareth of House Valthara, here on official imperial business. You will submit to inspection and prepare to answer for your violations of the containment accords." There was a pause. Then the human voice returned, and Zareth detected something unexpected in it: amusement. "Well, Lady Zareth, welcome to New Haven. We'll be happy to show you around." Permission to come aboard? The request puzzled her. In her experience, lesser species either cowered in fear or submitted immediately to imperial authority. This human seemed to be treating her visit like a social call. Her ship docked with the human vessel an hour later. Zareth stepped through the airlock wearing her formal diplomatic robes, their silver threads catching the light. Her escort of 2 Kethmori guards flanked her, their weapons visible but not drawn. Captain Morrison waited for her in the docking bay. He was tall for a human, with brown hair and green eyes that met hers directly. This was another breach of protocol. Lesser beings were supposed to lower their gaze in the presence of nobility. "Lady Zareth," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome." "Aboard. I'm Jake Morrison." She stared at the offered hand, uncertain what to do. Her cultural training had not prepared her for this gesture. Morrison seemed to realize her confusion and lowered his arm. Sorry, human custom. We shake hands when we meet. Would you prefer a bow? You will address me with proper respect, Zareth said, though her voice lacked its usual authority. Something about this human's easy manner made formal commands feel awkward. Of course, Morrison replied. Would you like to see our colony? I think you'll find it interesting. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Zareth noticed details that troubled her. The humans moved with purpose, but without fear. They nodded respectfully to Morrison, but did not grovel or scramble out of his way. Some even smiled at him, a casual familiarity that her implants labeled as improper, but that her deeper mind found oddly appealing. They entered a large room filled with strange equipment. A woman with dark hair looked up from a microscope and waved at Morrison. Jake, perfect timing. Come look at this. Lady Zareth, this is Dr. Lisa Park, our xenobiologist, Morrison said. Lisa, we have a distinguished visitor from the Kethmori Empire. Dr. Park walked over, her movements quick and energetic. She looked directly at Zareth with bright, curious eyes. Fascinating, she said. I've never met a Kethmori noble before. Your neural implant configuration is remarkable. How do they interface with your natural thought patterns? Zareth felt her world tilt slightly. No one had ever asked her about her implants. They were simply part of her, as natural as breathing. The question itself seemed to violate some invisible boundary. I do not understand your meaning, she sighed carefully. The devices behind your ears, Dr. Park explained, pointing with academic enthusiasm. They're clearly advanced neurotechnology. Do they enhance cognitive function or regulate emotional responses? The words hit Zareth like physical blows. Her implants had never been described as devices before. They were part of her perfection, part of what made her superior to lesser beings. Yet this human spoke of them as if they were tools, artificial, additions to her natural mind. Her head began to ache, a sharp pain that her implants tried to suppress. But something was wrong. The pain was getting stronger instead of fading away. Perhaps we should continue this conversation later, Morrison said, noticing her distress. You look tired from your journey. Zareth nodded gratefully, though she could not understand why she felt grateful to a human. As they walked toward guest quarters, she found herself studying Morrison and Dr. Park with new eyes. Their easy confidence, their casual intelligence, their complete lack of the submission she had always expected from inferior species. For the first time in her life, Lady Zareth began to wonder if everything she had been taught about the natural order might be wrong. Zareth spent the night in the guest quarters, but sleep would not come. Her neural implants kept sending correction signals through her brain, trying to restore proper thinking patterns. Each pulse brought fresh pain that made her teeth clench, and her hands shake. When morning came, Captain Morrison knocked on her door. He carried a tray with food and what appeared to be a hot beverage. Thought you might be hungry, he said, setting the tray on a small table. The coffee might help with your headache, too. How did you know about my headache? Zareth asked. Morrison smiled. Lucky guess. Plus, Dr. Park mentioned that neural implants sometimes cause discomfort when exposed to new stimuli. Your brain is probably working overtime trying to process unfamiliar experiences. The casual way he discussed her implants made Zareth feel exposed and vulnerable. She sipped the coffee, surprised by its bitter warmth. The pain in her head lessened slightly. I need to inspect your colony, she said, falling back on official duty to steady herself. Of course, but first there's something you should see. Morrison led her through the ship to an observation deck. Through the transparent walls, Zareth could see the planet below and several other ships in orbit. But these were not human vessels. She recognized Zephyrian design in one sleek craft, and another bore the geometric patterns of Morlock construction. Your records show only human settlement, she said, her voice sharp with accusation. Our records are accurate, Morrison replied. But they don't tell the whole story. These aren't settlers. They're visitors, refugees, and friends. A new voice interrupted them. Captain Morrison, the delegation from Zephyr Prime has arrived. Zareth turned to see a human woman with red hair approaching them. Her uniform was different from Morrison's, marked with symbols that suggested military rank. Lady Zareth. This is Commander Rick Stone, our security chief, Morrison said. Rick, Lady Zareth is here to investigate our alleged violations of the Containment Accords. Stone's expression grew serious. Ma'am, with respect, I think you need to understand what those accords really mean for the species involved. Before Zareth could respond, Stone activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air between them, showing what looked like industrial facilities on various worlds. These are Kethmori processing centers, Stone explained. This is where they take members of conquered species for neural modification. The procedures ensure permanent compliance and remove the capacity for independent thought. Zareth stared at the images. She recognized the architecture as Kethmori, but she had never seen facilities like these before. These are education centers, she said automatically. We help lesser species reach their proper potential. Watch this, Stone said, changing the display. The new images showed the interior of one facility. Beings of various species lay on tables while Kethmori technicians worked on their heads. The expressions on the patients' faces were vacant, empty of personality or awareness. In the background, others waited in long lines, their eyes filled with terror. Zareth felt her stomach twist. The pain in her head spiked sharply as her implants fought against the emotional response. This is not education, Stone continued. This is the systematic destruction of individual consciousness. Your people have been doing this for centuries, turning entire populations into biological machines. You lie, Zareth whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Something deep inside her recognized truth in the images. Morrison touched her shoulder gently. We're not your enemies, Lady Zareth, but we can't stand by and watch this happen. To other species. That's why we've been helping some of them escape. A new person entered the observation deck. She was small and elderly, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her white coat marked her as medical personnel. This is Dr. Amy Cross, our chief psychologist, Morrison said. Amy, Lady Zareth, has been experiencing some discomfort with her neural implants. Dr. Cross studied Zareth with professional interest. The implants are fighting against conflicting information, she observed. They're designed to suppress thoughts that contradict the established worldview. But exposure to alternative perspectives is causing system stress. You speak as if they are separate from me, Zareth said. Aren't they? Dr. Cross asked gently. Tell me, do you remember having different thoughts as a child? Moments when you questioned things before the questioning stopped? The question hit Zareth like a physical blow. Suddenly, fragments of memory surfaced. A younger version of herself asking her mother why the Threx servants looked sad. Being told that such questions were inappropriate. The memory of crying alone in her room, though she could not remember why the sadness had eventually faded away. The implants were installed when you were very young, Dr. Cross continued. Probably around age 5 or 6, when your natural curiosity would have started challenging authority. They've been shaping your thoughts ever since, but they're not you. The real you is still in there. Zareth gripped the railing of the observation deck as more memories flooded back. Pet creature she had loved until one day she simply forgot. About it, questions about art and music that had once fascinated her before becoming unimportant. Dreams of traveling to strange worlds that had been replaced by dreams of serving the Empire. This is impossible, she said, but even as she spoke, She knew it was true. Danny Walsh, a young human engineer, joined their group. His clothes were stained with grease, and his hands were dirty from work, but his eyes sparkled with intelligence. And humor. "Lady Zarath," he said with a grin, "you should see what we've been building down on the planet. It's pretty amazing." His casual friendliness was so different from the formal respect she was accustomed to. Instead of irritation, she found herself curious about his work. "What are you building?" she asked. "Communication array," Danny replied enthusiastically. "Big enough to reach every system in this galactic arm. We figure it's time everyone knew what was really happening out here." The implications of his words terrified her. "You plan to spread sedition across the galaxy." "We plan to spread truth," Morrison corrected. "People deserve to know they have choices." That evening, Zarath sat alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in her adult life, she tried to think forbidden thoughts. What if the Empire was wrong? What if the hierarchy was not natural law, but artificial construction? What if she was not genetically superior, but simply conditioned to believe she was? Each question brought waves of pain from her implants, but she persisted. The agony was worth it for the glimpses of clarity that came between the corrections. Soft chime indicated someone at her door. Dr. Cross entered carrying a medical scanner. "Your implants are failing," she said without preamble. "The conflict between your suppressed thoughts and your experiences here is causing them to malfunction. If the process continues, you could suffer permanent brain damage." "Then I should leave," Zarath said. "You could," Dr. Cross agreed, "or you could let us help you. We've learned a lot about Kethmori neurotechnology from other refugees. We might be able to safely remove the implants entirely." The suggestion was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. To live without the implants would mean facing thoughts and emotions she had never experienced. It would mean becoming someone entirely different from the person she had always been. "What would I become?" she asked. "Yourself," Dr. Cross replied. "Simply the person you were meant to be before they changed you." Outside her window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. For the first time in her life, Zarath looked at them and wondered what lay beyond the borders of the Empire. The pain in her head grew stronger, but so did her curiosity about the answer. The pain became unbearable during the third night. Zarath collapsed in her quarters, her body convulsing as her neural implants sent chaotic signals through her brain. The devices that had controlled her thoughts for decades were burning themselves out, unable to process the cascade of forbidden ideas flooding her. Consciousness. Dr. Cross and her medical team worked frantically to save her life. They had dealt with implant failure before, but never in someone of such high rank whose modifications were so extensive. The surgery took 18 hours, carefully removing the damaged technology while trying to preserve the natural neural pathways. Underneath, when Zarath finally woke, the silence in her head was overwhelming. For the first time since childhood, her thoughts were entirely her own. The absence of the constant humming correction signals left her feeling naked and exposed. "How do you feel?" Dr. Cross asked, checking her vital signs. Zarath tried to speak, but found herself crying instead. The tears came from somewhere deep inside, carrying decades of suppressed emotions. Joy mixed with grief, wonder with terror, as her mind experienced feelings that had been chemically blocked for most of her. "Life. I remember," she whispered between sobs. "I remember everything they took from me." Captain Morrison sat beside her bed. His presence was comforting in a way she had never experienced before. Without her implants labeling him as inferior, she could see him clearly as an individual with his own intelligence, compassion, and strength. "Tell me about your people," she said when the crying finally stopped. "Tell me how you became free." Morrison smiled sadly. "We weren't always free. Humans have a long history of oppressing each other. We had slavery, caste systems, rulers who claimed divine authority. But we learned to question those systems. We fought wars to end them. It took centuries, but we discovered that freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you take. Over the following days, as Zarath recovered, the humans shared their history with her. They showed her records of their struggles against tyranny, their gradual development of concepts like individual rights and democratic government. She learned about humans who had died fighting for freedom, not just for themselves, but for others. Your species chose to change, she said to Morrison during one of their conversations. But can the Kethmori change? Can any species that has been shaped by genetic modification become something different? I don't know, Morrison replied honestly. But I think the fact that you're asking the question proves it's possible. Danny Walsh had become a frequent visitor during her recovery. His easy humor and creative mind fascinated her. He showed her human art, music, and literature. Things created not for practical purposes, but simply for the joy of creation. This serves no function, she said, studying a painting of a sunset. Sure it does, Danny grinned. It makes people happy. It makes them think about beauty and wonder. That's not useless. The concept of creating something purely for emotional impact was alien to her. Kethmori culture valued only efficiency and order. But as she stared at the painting, she felt something stir inside her chest. A longing for something she could not name. Dr. Lisa Park continued her research, but now she included Zarath as a colleague rather than a subject. They discussed xenobiology, comparing what Zarath had been taught with what Park had observed. Your education was designed to justify your actions, Park explained. You were taught that other species were naturally inferior, but the genetic evidence shows that's not true. Intelligence, creativity, and moral capacity exist across all the species. We've studied. The differences are cultural and environmental, not biological. This revelation struck Zarath deeply. Everything she had believed about the natural order was built on lies. The hierarchy that had shaped her entire existence was artificial. Maintained through deception and Force. Commander Stone showed her more footage from the processing centers. Now that her implants were gone, she could see the images clearly. The terror in the prisoner's eyes, the mechanical efficiency of the technicians, the complete absence of compassion in the process. How many? She asked. Billions, Stone replied. Quietly, entire species have been modified. Some have been extinct as free-thinking beings for generations. The weight of her people's crimes crushed down on her. She had been part of this system, had enforced its laws without question. The guilt was almost unbearable. I was a monster, she whispered. No, Morrison said firmly. You were a victim, too. They stole your ability to choose, your capacity for independent thought. You can't be held responsible for actions you took while under that level of mental control. During her recovery, emergency messages had been arriving from the Kethmori. Fleet. Lord Commander Velthara was demanding reports from his daughter. The delay in her responses had made him suspicious. He's coming, Zarath said, reading the latest transmission. My father is bringing a battle fleet to investigate. They'll destroy this colony and everyone in it. The humans received this news with grim determination rather than panic. They had always known this moment would come. How long do we have? Morrison asked. 3 days, maybe 4, Zarath replied. But you could escape, take your ships and flee to another system. And leave other species to suffer while we run? Dr. Cross shook her head. That's not who we are. Danny showed her the communication. Array he'd been building on the planet's surface. The massive structure was nearly complete, its transmission dishes pointing toward the galactic core. We've been preparing for this, he explained. One broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Every species will hear the truth about the Kethmori Empire at the same time. They'll know they're not alone in suffering. They'll know that resistance is possible. The transmission will take hours to complete, Morrison added. We need someone to delay the fleet long enough for the message to reach every system. Zareth understood what they were asking. Her noble rank and family connections could buy them precious time. But using her authority to protect rebels would mark her as a traitor. There would be no going back to her old life. She looked around at the humans who had become her friends. People who had risked their lives to free her mind, who treated her as an equal despite her past crimes, who were willing to die for the freedom of species they had never met. I'll do it, she said quietly. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff into empty space. But for the first time in her life, the choice was entirely her own. That night, she stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars. Soon her father's fleet would arrive, bringing the full weight of imperial justice. The confrontation would determine not just her fate, but the future of every thinking being in the galaxy. She was no longer the perfect daughter, bred for obedience and shaped by technology. She was something new, something dangerous to the established order. She was free. The Kethmori battle fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a dark storm. 12 massive warships arranged themselves in attack formation around the human colony. At their center flew Lord Commander Velthara's flagship, its hull decorated with the silver emblems of House Velthara. Zareth stood on the bridge of the human command ship, her hands steady despite the fear in her chest. She wore her formal diplomatic robes, but they felt like a costume now. She was playing the part of the obedient daughter one last time. "Attention, Imperial Fleet," she broadcast on the official command frequency. "This is Lady Zareth of House Velthara. I am conducting a detailed inspection of this facility under High Arbiter authority. Maintain position and await my orders." The response came immediately. Her father's voice was cold and suspicious. "Daughter, your reports have been delayed and incomplete. Explain your status." "The situation here is more complex than initial intelligence suggested," Zaroth replied, using the formal speech patterns of Kethmori nobility. "The humans have been engaging in activities that require thorough investigation before action can be taken." Behind her, Captain Morrison coordinated the final preparations for their desperate plan. The communication array on the planet's surface was almost ready. Dr. Park worked with resistance contacts across the galaxy, preparing them for the moment when the broadcast would begin. "You have had sufficient time for investigation." Velthara's voice crackled through the speakers. "Prepare to transfer to my flagship immediately." Zareth closed her eyes briefly. The moment of truth had arrived. "Father, I request additional time to complete my analysis. There are legal complications that require careful review." The silence that followed stretched for long minutes. When her father spoke again, his tone had changed. "You will transport to my ship now, Zareth. That is a direct order." "I cannot comply at this time," she said, her voice growing stronger. "My investigation has revealed evidence of criminal misconduct that extends beyond the human colony. I must verify these findings before submitting my final report." Down on the planet, Danny Walsh made the final connections to the communication array. The massive structure hummed with power as it prepared to send humanity's message to every inhabited world in the galaxy. Commander Stone positioned the colony's defenses, knowing they were hopelessly outmatched against Imperial warships. The humans had courage, but limited firepower. Their only advantage was the moral certainty of their cause. "Zareth," her father's voice carried a new edge of anger. "You are displaying behavior patterns inconsistent with your conditioning. Report to my ship for medical evaluation." She almost laughed at the irony. Her father thought she was malfunctioning, when in reality she was functioning properly for the first time in decades. My conditioning is irrelevant, she replied. What matters is the evidence I have discovered about Imperial policies regarding conquered species. Evidence that you need to see before taking any precipitous action. The flagship began moving closer, its weapons charging. Velfara was losing patience with diplomacy. Dr. Cross, monitoring the tactical display. The broadcast system is online, she reported. We can begin transmission as soon as the array reaches full power. Morrison nodded to Zareth. Everything now depended on her ability to buy them enough time. Imperial Fleet, this is Lady Zareth, she broadcast again. I am invoking Noble Privilege Code 7 under the ancient laws. All military action in? This system is suspended pending completion of my investigation. This was a desperate gambit. The code she had cited was ancient and rarely used, but it did grant high-ranking nobles temporary authority to halt military operations for legal review. Her father's response was swift and furious. You dare invoke the ancient laws against your own family? Your behavior confirms my suspicions. You have been compromised by enemy influence. I have been freed by the truth, Zareth replied, abandoning formal protocol. Father, what we have been doing to other species is wrong. We are not superior beings bringing order to the galaxy. We are conquerors destroying the minds and spirits of entire civilizations. The communication array reached full power. Danny gave Morrison a thumbs up from the planet's surface. The broadcast began, carrying humanity's message toward 1,000 worlds. Velfara's flagship opened fire on the human command ship. The shields held against the first barrage, but Zareth knew they could not withstand sustained attack from Imperial weapons. All ships, concentrate fire on the rebel vessel, Velfara commanded. My daughter has been corrupted by enemy propaganda. She is no longer Keth Mori. The words struck Zareth like physical blows, but she felt relief along with the pain. Her father had finally spoken the truth. She was no longer the person he had created. The human ship shuddered under enemy fire. Systems failed as the shields collapsed. Around them, the small colonial fleet tried to protect the communication array, their ships darting between the massive Imperial warships, like insects, attacking giants. Dr. Park reported that the broadcast was reaching systems throughout the galactic arm. On dozens of worlds, subjugated species were hearing the truth about their oppressors for the first time in generations. The Zephyrians are responding, she called out excitedly. They're jamming Imperial communications on their homeworld. The Morlachs are broadcasting their own messages of support. But the human defenses were crumbling. Commander Stone's tactical ships were being destroyed one by one. The communication array on the planet's surface took a direct hit, its transmission flickering. Zareth made her final choice. She accessed her noble command codes, using emergency protocols she had memorized as a child. For a few precious minutes, she could override the fleet's weapon systems. What are you doing? Morrison asked as she worked frantically at the control panel. Buying you time, she replied. The codes will burn out my remaining neural interfaces, but it will disable their weapons long enough for you to complete the broadcast. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Her modified neural pathways, already damaged by the implant removal, began to fail completely as she forced them to carry signals they were never designed to handle. One by one, the Imperial warships went dark as their weapon systems shut down. Velfara's furious commands echoed across the communication channels, but his ships could not respond. The communication array flickered back to life. Danny had managed emergency repairs, and the broadcast continued. Humanity's message of hope. And resistance spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Zareth collapsed as her nervous system overloaded. The last thing she saw was Morrison kneeling beside her, his face filled with concern and admiration. Did we do it? She whispered. The message is transmitting, he replied. Every world in the galaxy will hear it. Through the pain, she smiled. She had betrayed everything she was born to be and become something far more important. She had become free. The Imperial fleet's weapons came back online, but it was too late. The broadcast was complete, and across the galaxy, the age of unquestioned Kethmori dominance was ending. Revolution had begun. Zareth woke in the human medical bay 3 days later. Her head felt strange, empty in some ways, but also clearer than it had ever been. Dr. Cross sat beside her bed, monitoring her recovery with gentle eyes. The neural damage is permanent, the doctor explained quietly. Your brain had to rewire itself completely after the overload. You'll never be the same person you were before. Good, Zareth replied without hesitation. That person was a lie. Through the medical bay windows, she could see something remarkable happening in space around the colony. Ships were arriving from across the galaxy. Not just human vessels, but craft from dozens of species. The broadcast had worked beyond their wildest hopes. Captain Morrison entered the medical bay, carrying a datapad filled with reports. His face showed exhaustion, but also fierce joy. The Zephyrians were first, he said, sitting beside her bed. Their telepathic abilities helped them resist the mental conditioning faster than other species. They've seized control of their homeworld and are broadcasting their own messages of rebellion. Zareth struggled to sit up, her body still weak from the neural trauma. How many worlds have risen? 47 confirmed so far, Morrison replied. The Morlachs have declared independence from Imperial rule. 3 Threx labor colonies have overthrown their overseers. Even some Kethmori worlds are reporting civil unrest. The implications were staggering. In just 3 days, the galaxy-spanning empire that had ruled for millennia was fracturing. The perfect order her people had maintained through mental manipulation was crumbling as species after species rediscovered their capacity for independent thought. Danny Walsh bounded into the medical bay with his usual enthusiasm. Zareth, you're awake. Wait until you see what we've been building. He helped her to a wheelchair and took her to the observation deck. Outside, the sight took her breath away. The space around New Haven had become a staging ground for revolution. Refugee ships carried liberated beings from processing centers. Military vessels that had defected from Imperial service joined the growing rebel fleet. They're calling it the Free Alliance, Danny explained. Every species that wants to be free is welcome. No hierarchy, no genetic castes, just people working together. Dr. Lisa Park joined them, her excitement barely contained. The medical data we're collecting is incredible, she said. We're learning how to reverse decades of neural conditioning. Some species can recover completely if we intervene quickly. Enough. Through the viewport, Zareth watched as former slaves learned to use weapons. As scientists from different worlds shared knowledge freely, as beings who had never been allowed to think for themselves began to plan their own futures. But the celebration was interrupted by an urgent communication from Commander Stone. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive Imperial fleet approaching, he announced. Over 200 ships, including Lord Commander Valthara's personal armada. The rebellion had grown quickly, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the Imperial forces. The Kethmori military machine was vast and powerful, built over centuries of conquest. We need to evacuate, Morrison said grimly. Get as many refugees to safety as possible before they arrive. No, Zareth said quietly. Running won't solve anything. It will just delay the inevitable and condemn other worlds to continued slavery. She turned her wheelchair to face the assembled leaders. My father is coming not just to destroy this colony, but to negotiate. The rebellion has spread too far for simple military suppression. He'll want to end this quickly with minimal damage to Imperial infrastructure. Her prediction proved correct. When the Imperial fleet arrived, it did not immediately attack. Instead, Velthara's flagship transmitted a message requesting parley. The meeting took place aboard a neutral Morlac vessel that had joined the rebellion. Zareth faced her father across a conference table with Morrison and other Alliance leaders. Flanking her, Lord Commander Velthara looked older than she remembered. The perfect composure that had always defined him showed cracks of uncertainty and fatigue. "My daughter," he said, his voice carrying both sadness and steel. "You have fallen far from what you were meant to be. I have risen to what I chose to become," she replied. "Father, the Empire is built on lies. Our genetic superiority is a myth used to justify slavery and murder. We can still change course before it's too late." Velthara's expression hardened. "The Empire has brought order to the galaxy for 3,000 years. Without our guidance, these lesser species will destroy themselves in chaos and war." "Give them the chance to prove you wrong," Morrison interjected. "Humanity went through our own dark periods, but we learned to be better. Every species deserves that opportunity." "You offer naive idealism," Velthara replied. "I offer practical reality. End this rebellion now, and I will grant independence to humanity and perhaps a few other select species. Continue this path, and I will burn every rebel world to ash." Zareth studied her father's face and saw something she had never noticed before. Fear. The Lord Commander of the Kethmori Empire was afraid because his perfect system was collapsing. "Your offer is rejected," she said firmly. "We will not purchase our freedom with the continued slavery of others. Every intelligent being in this galaxy has the right to choose their own destiny." The negotiations continued for hours, but no compromise could be reached. Velthara represented the old order, built on hierarchy and control. The Alliance represented something new, founded on equality and choice. When talks finally broke down, Velthara looked directly at his daughter. "You force me to treat you as an enemy," he said. "I had hoped to save you from your madness." "I'm not mad, Father," Zareth replied gently. "I'm free, and that freedom is spreading to every corner of the galaxy." The war that followed was brutal and costly. The Imperial forces had superior technology and numbers, but the rebels fought with the desperate courage of beings who had tasted freedom and would not give it up. Months later, Zareth stood in the command center of the Alliance flagship, watching reports pour in from across the galaxy. The rebellion had become a true revolution. Entire sectors had declared independence. Some Kethmori nobles, their own implants failing under the stress of collapsed certainties, had joined the rebel. Danny worked beside her, now wearing the insignia of the Alliance Engineering Corps. Dr. Cross continued her work freeing minds from neural conditioning, while Dr. Park studied ways to help formerly enslaved species rediscover their natural abilities. "The Kethmori government has agreed to peace talks," Morrison reported, approaching her with the latest intelligence. "They're finally ready to negotiate a real settlement." Zareth nodded, but her attention was focused on the tactical display, showing liberated worlds spreading across the galaxy like points of light in the darkness. "What will you do when the war ends?" Danny asked her. She considered the question carefully. The person she had been was gone forever. The empire that had created her no longer existed in its old form. She was something new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. "I'll help build something better," she said finally. "A galaxy where every being can choose their own path, where genetic accidents of birth don't determine worth, where freedom isn't a privilege but a right." Through the viewport, stars wheeled in patterns unchanged since the universe began. But everything else was different now. The galaxy was waking up from a 3,000-year nightmare of imposed order and artificial hierarchy. The revolution was far from over. There would be more battles, more negotiations, more difficult choices ahead. But for the first time in galactic history, the outcome was not predetermined by genetic caste or technological control. Zareth smiled as she watched another world declare its independence. She had been born to obey, shaped to serve, and programmed for submission. But she had chosen to defy not just her father or her species, but the fundamental assumptions that had governed civilization itself. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be.